Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you just stumble across this and are wondering what is this, I am an archaeologist and Genshin player, and I recently started to do some deep delve videos about Genshin Impact's historical reference. Trust me, there are many, so if you think you might like this kind of content, you can follow me, give me a like, leave me a comment, whatever. And you can also follow me on HoYoLab. You'll find the link in the description. So if you've seen my previous videos, you might have noticed a little change of background. That's because I'm currently spending some time in Switzerland. So yeah, but I've still got my personal assistant director with me, so hopefully everything will turn out fine. And today I also wanted to do something a little bit different from what I have done in my previous videos. So instead of delving into the historical references just out of curiosity, I wanted to try and see whether we can use some of those to actually guess some plot points, future plot points in Genshin. Why do I want to do that? You might have guessed that's because of the major lore drop we got with the new version 4.7, which dropped last week. That's also one of the reasons why I waited a bit longer to put this one together. Firstly, because I really felt I needed to do some more research before talking of anything. Secondly, because I wanted to give you some more time to actually get to play the new content. And last but not least, because it took me about 2 days to just get over the shock. So let's get started. Version 4.7, guys, it was a whole lot to take in. So we got finally reunited a second time with our twin, albeit in a memory and for a very short period of time, and we can't even remember it, or maybe we can, since we got that little picture in the end. I guess that creates some kind of memory in anyway. Thank you, Khaenri'ah. I guess you really were too good for this word. And speaking of Khaenri'ah, we also got to see how he ended up, which was downright tragic. All I can say is that I think I cried for about, I don't know, 30 minutes maybe. And it made me really, really, really concerned. I just hope MiHoYo won't ever pull this trick again. Especially not with anyone who shares a name with Khaenri'ah, if you know what I mean. But anyway, back to the content. We also got Dane's life finally opening up a bit, even about himself. I guess I can finally see why he doesn't seem to trust anyone. I guess it must be really, really, really awful to have your own brother turn his back on you, especially during a crisis. And last but not least, he dropped some major lore about what we now know are the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah. So, aside from finally giving a meaning to this line, and I can't believe it sat there for about 4 years before we actually have an explanation for it. How much do you know? Tell me how much. Why do you always seem to know everything? Sorry about that. What can we say about those 5? So we already had some information about some of them at least. So we got to meet, I guess, Vetfolnir in version 3.5. We heard about Surtalogi from Skirk in version 4.2, and she actually dropped some really, really concerning information, since if you think about it, the novel, which almost dissolved the entirety of Fontaine in one go, she referred to that as Surtalogi's pet. So if this is anything to go by, I'm really, really scared about the power level of these people. And last but not least, we got Hroptatyr from about the start of the game, of whom we know quite some info too, even if they're usually hidden in the lore. So we know she is Albedo's mom, I guess, and she also produced many of the monstrous beings that once roamed Teyvat, such as the Reef Towns and Alinas and Durin and maybe others, who knows. And one more thing we actually do know about her that often gets overlooked, I don't know why, is that she and Albedo actually found an artifact somewhere in a mysterious domain called the Heart of Naberius, and following that she suddenly disappeared, dropping Albedo in Mondstadt. That actually makes me wonder what this Heart of Naberius is and why everything with potential plot relevance gets suddenly dropped in Mondstadt. But anyway, I guess that will be for another video to discuss. So back to the 5 sinners, we also got 2 new names that we really knew nothing about up until now. These are Hreirir, the Rächer of Solnari, that means Avenger of Solnari in German, and also this mysterious Hroptatyr. Now, I will try and cover each of the 5 sinners and what we can say about their identity and possible role in the game and what their meaning can be. But this will take me a little longer, so for this first video I will just focus on the last one, so Hroptatyr, the Sage. I've been looking around at the different theories that have been circulating around these days, and what I found out is that many people are starting to say, well, maybe Hroptatyr could be Pierrot. And I'm telling you right now, I do not agree with this theory at all. But I guess the reason why they're coming up with that is that Hroptatyr has been called a sage, and that out of the 3 characters that we have so far confirmed to be from Khaenri'ah in the game, he certainly is the most likely to fit this bill. The problem I have with that is that it would openly contradict another piece of lore we've been having in the game since a very long time, and that's the only one true bit of lore that we still have about Pierrot. That's the Mocking Mask description from the Pale Flame artifact set. So I'll take it for you, and what's interesting is the second and third sentence, so I'll read it for you. Since my level of learning could not compare with the sages, I failed to earn the favor of the previous ruler. So too did I fail to stop them from tearing away the veil of sin, ushering in a tide of divine wrath, destruction, and foolishness. And then, of course, he goes on to say how he became the first Fatus, and he basically founded what is now the Fatui. So, as you can see, this Mocking Mask description gives at least 2 reasons why Pierrot cannot be Hroptatyr. Why? Firstly, because it says in an explicit way that Pierrot was actually less learned compared to the other sages, and that's why they didn't listen to him. And secondly, it says he tried to stop them from doing something he calls tearing away the veil of sin. This, if you ask me, has everything to do with what Dainslife told us in the new version, namely that 5 out of the 6 people who were tasked with watching out for this Winster King that we still know nothing about. I'll see whether I'll talk about him in a later video, but for now, let's just leave him be. So 5 out of 6 people actually gave in to some kind of power, probably from the abyss, and became sinners. So Pierrot wasn't in this group. He tried to prevent this from happening, and if you ask me, probably succeeded with Dane's life. And this could also explain something that we got told back in version 3.6. So if you remember the Quadrana quest, when there was a moment when we reactivated this whole cycle with the Amrita, purifying the tree, the oasis tree that I'm not going to try and pronounce because it's just too difficult for me. That's the name, if you want it. So when we reactivate this cycle once again, we got to see for a split second part of the memories of Set 3 that acts as sort of a counterpart of the Irminsul. That's quite interesting, actually. And what did we see? We saw two figures emerging from the Tunigiolo once the disaster, once the cataclysm was nearly over. And one of this figure was labeled as a warrior and the other one was labeled as a sage. Now, we can be sure one of them is Dane's life. Why? Because Zurvan actually told us, she also told us he was carrying a ring, and we know Dane's life has a ring. And the other one we know nothing about, but since Pierrot founded the Fatui just after the cataclysm, we can safely assume it was him. It's actually the only time that he actually gets called a sage. But as we saw, it's highly unlikely so that Hroptatyr could be identified with Pierrot. Once we got rid of this hypothesis, let's go back to the name Hroptatyr and see if there is some better candidate around for it. So if you Google the name Hroptatyr, the first thing you'll find is a list of names provided by Wikipedia, and these are all the different names and attributes that the Vikings gave to their main god Odin. So the question becomes, is there any other character in Genshin that can be tied to Odin in some way? The answer is, of course there is. Do you all remember King Irmin? He was the last king of the Eclipse dynasty that became somehow unfit to rule, and so that Anfortas Alberich had to step in and take the regency, and after that we don't know what happened with the king. So I remember when I first saw his name back in the Hidden Strife event, the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh my god, this guy has a name tied with the Irminsul, hasn't he? Well, yes, of course, and there's a very good reason for it. Let's go back to our list for a minute, shall we? So, if you scroll down to the latter part of the list, you will actually see another name that's quite interesting, and that's Yegr. It means the terrible one, but what's even more interesting is that it's tied to the Norse name given to the Irminsul. So the Irminsul and the Yggdrasil are basically the same thing, and the Irminsul is the Germanic name, and Yggdrasil is the name the Vikings gave to the Tree of Life. Now, what I find interesting is the etymology, the origin of these two names. So Irminsul is basically understood to mean something along the lines of pillar of the world, which makes sense, while Yggdrasil is actually a compound of Ygr, so the name we saw earlier referring to Odin, and Drasil. Now Drasil actually means horse in Old Norse, but most studies suggest that it in this context, it should be actually a roundabout way to refer to a gallows. So Yggdrasil should mean basically Odin's gallows. And I know it's strange. I mean, why in the world would the Vikings refer to the tree of life, the pillar of the world, as Odin's gallows? And there's an interesting reason for this. So we have this myth that tells us how Odin came to obtain the power of the 16 runes that compose the Viking alphabet, the Futhark. And how did he do that? He basically hung himself from the Yggdrasil. He stood there for 9 days and 9 nights until he fell from the tree, and the Yggdrasil yielded these 16 runes of power. And what's interesting to note, in fact, is that in Viking society, and in fact in just about any ancient society, the runes or any other letter system, alphabetic system, were both used for writing, regular writing, so for everyday life, and as a mean to achieve otherworldly knowledge. So often we see letters being used in divination practices or even in magical practices, both for black magic, aggressive magic, magic intended to do harm, and protective magic, white magic, healing magic. And particularly in Viking society, this was very, very, very important and has been going on practically until they were Christianized in around the 10th, 11th century AD. So already you're seeing that we are getting close to this concept of knowledge, of otherworldly knowledge also. And what's interesting also is that this myth was actually already referenced by Genshin during the Sumeru conquest. So we got this item in our inventory. That's the twig from the Irminsul that we got from this very emotional scene between Nahida and Rukkhadevata. And as you can see in the description, we can read, trees also symbolize wisdom. In one of the legends, a sage hanging upside down on a tree had acquired the knowledge on how to inscribe runes and control sacred words, and thus followed the kingdom established along the tree's roots, eventually gaining a glimpse of the secret of the cosmos. But aside from that, there's more. You might have noticed that I haven't mentioned Hroptatyr in a while, so what was all that for? Well, why don't we go back to the original text, the only source we have for this myth of Odin and the runes, which is the Runatal, and that's a ballad preserved in a 13th century manuscript. That's the Codex Regius, and Wikipedia fortunately has both the Norse and the English translation for it. So let's check it out. And if you look at the second stanza, we have the moment where finally Odin gets the runes after his long ordeal. And I'm not going to read from Norse because of I don't think I can pronounce it well, but anyway, in English we have, I took up the runes, screaming I took them, then I fell back from there, so from the tree. And if you look at the Norse version, so the original text, it gives this verb or opandi. Now, I tried to look into it, and in some Norse dictionaries that I could find online, I found this verb op, which means basically to scream. That's why it's translated this way. And even more interesting is that in Icelandic, which is the closest relative there is to ancient Norse. So basically modern Icelandic still is very, very close to Viking. I looked into an ancient, a modern Icelandic dictionary that I could find online, and here's what I found. As you can see, there's another verb, that's hropa, that means to slander in an older sense, perhaps. That has been also, if you can, maybe you can see here, it has been compared to the German rufen, that actually means to call. But what I find really, really, really interesting, it's the second meaning, which is a bit more modern, and that is to cry, to call aloud, and looks to me very, very close to this ancient Norse verb op. But hropa, with this HR here in the very beginning of the word, kind of sounds a whole lot like the first element in Hroptatyr. So if we take again the name Hroptatyr, we have a first element, Hropta, that we don't really know what it is about, but the second element we are quite sure of, and that's Tyr. Tyr is actually, just means God. So we have something God, and given how close Hropta is with Icelandic Hropa, one possibility is that we have a screaming God. And the reason why we find this translation in the Wikipedia list, so the sage, is that Hropta could refer to this scream that Odin gives out the moment he gets the runes, which is both so a releasing scream, because you have to imagine he's been hanging from that tree for 9 days and 9 nights. Must be pretty hard to go through that. But it's also a creating scream. So in many religious system, there's this belief that the word has the power to create, to alter reality. And that's also why the runes were considered so important in magical practices, because once you write, once you speak, you alter the reality around you. So back to Hroptatyr and to why I really find that the best candidate to be identified with this mysterious sinner is decidedly Irmin and not Pierrot. I will quickly sum up that which we talked about for the last 20 minutes or so. So we have a character, Irmin, that is tied by his name to the Irminsul, exactly the same way that Yggdrasil is tied to Yggdra, another name of Odin in Norse mythology. And this tie is actually a reference to a very specific myth. That's how Odin obtained the runes. That has actually been already referenced in Genshin in the twig we got at the end of the Sumeru conquest. Also, what I find interesting is that actually the runes themselves can symbolize both worldly and otherworldly knowledge, and that would sit extremely well with the fact that the sinners basically access some kind of power or knowledge or whatever that they really shouldn't have. So we reached the end of this rather lengthy video. I hope I managed to keep everything clear. If you have any questions, just leave me a comment here or on HioLab, it's the same. And really just let me know your thoughts. What do you think about version 4.7? Was it a good version? Has it been as impactful as it was for me? what you think of all the lore we got dropped, so about the sinners, the loom of fate, about the siblings, how this game will end, and whatever else comes to your mind. Let's discuss it. I will try and let out the 2 other videos on the other 4 sinners as soon as I can. In the meantime, I hope you liked this first video of the series, and see you soon, guys.